We'll see. Hello, Roger.
Oh, hello, Philip. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Hope you are too.
I am indeed.
Good. Now, what are you on about?
Well, we're a group. We're called the ERED Group, and we represent people who have, if you like, explored the way that money is issued. We're now coordinating a class action against the banks because we believe that all mortgages are actually fraud. On the basis that the banks are claiming that they've actually lent money when in fact they have only issued credit, and they are chalk and cheese.
Right, now we have a particular caller who's got to be in his monitor about this and absolutely believes what you're saying to be correct, that the whole thing is fraud. But of course it always was from the very beginning, as I understand it. When money was invented, if you like, the goldsmiths in Venice or wherever it was, realised that they were holding more than they needed. People weren't coming and collecting it, so they started to lend it to people, and that's how the whole thing started, as I understand.
Yeah, but the thing is, Roger, this is very, very important, that the Bank of England have actually always said the opposite. And in fact, what's important, what's changed and what is different is because of the pressure of the publications on the internet. The Bank of England in its March quarterly bulletin actually came out and admitted that the banks do not lend money, they issue credit. And this is important because it's a bit like, if you don't have anything, how can you lend it out? And who does that money actually belong to? And of course, the banks issuing credit are lending. It's the nation's money, and the way to look at that is if the banks are actually issuing our money to ourselves, there is no entitlement for interest. It's actually a fraud. And it's interesting because one of the things I do is I write to banks, and I've written to a number of banks, and I've asked the question: are they claiming they've lent us money, or are they claiming they've issued credit? They will not answer that question. And there's a very simple reason they won't answer that question. It's because it's fraud. Now, we've got I hope it's all right to mention this, but we've got a meeting at the Laurie Centre tomorrow in Birkenhead at 7:30 in the evening, and we will be explaining to people how they can actually start or join us in a class action against the banks and claim back all the interest that they've ever paid on their mortgages. And we can prove conclusively that what the banks are claiming is not true. And under the Fraud Act of 2006, it's quite clear that if a person is in breach of this section, if he dishonestly makes a false representation and intends by doing so to make money. And that's exactly what the banks are doing.
The whole force of the city, of everybody, the establishment will be totally against this.
Of course they will. Of course they will, because the down the line, the establishment somewhere are benefiting from this. What's important, Roger, is this: we, the people, are actually losing out, because the nation could issue money and save £48 billion if it issued its own money, because it could do so free of interest. It did this in 1914 with the Bradbury. The treasurer at the time was John Bradley. He issued £400 million interest-free and saved the nation a fortune. Now we're talking trillions. So we've got the government that's borrowing from the banks when they do not need to do so. And as a direct consequence, it's the banks that are benefiting at the expense of the people. And I'd like people to turn up tomorrow at the Laurie Centre, and I will explain to them how this scam, and it is a scam, is costing the nation, not us individually, but the nation. It's costing us a fortune, because we could issue interest-free money to businesses. There is no shortage of money. That's a lie. The government could issue as much money as it needs for the National Health Service, for the roads, for defence, provided that there is a mechanism to claw that back. That's the only criteria. And there is a mechanism to claw it back, and that's the most important point. We could change the monetary system and the fiscal system very, very easily, and we would all benefit.
But that's just this country.
Is being run for the banks and the banks only.
It's a global economy. You talk about Barclays, you're talking about a massive international organisation, and that's true of pretty well all the banks.
Yeah, but it's all fraud, and that's the point.
Yeah, but we couldn't sort it just in one country. You couldn't sort it just in one country, could you?
Well, you could Yeah, absolutely. You could sort it in this country first, and there'll be a flow-on effect. The point is, the principle is this. The government is being disingenuous by saying there's a shortage of money. That's outrageous. There is no shortage of money. The key element here is that the government can issue as much money as it needs for the service of the people, and that includes benefits and so on and so forth, provided there's a mechanism to claw it back.
Okay.
As I've said, there is a mechanism to claw it
And
back.
there is no danger of the wheelbarrows that we saw, I didn't see them, in the 20s in Germany. In the
No,
30s.
because in fact it's reversed, because if you've got the banks issuing money and charging interest, that's more expensive than issuing money without interest. So in actual fact, there would be a benefit. The economy would boom. There would be no inflation. Again, that's a myth, the business about the inflation. If you put money into existing housing market, you get a property boom. But if you put new money into house building, you've got more product, and therefore the price of property goes down. So the concept that they try and promote, the bankers try and promote, is that it would cause inflation is an outrageous, it's disingenuous. And I think the point that the people need to start realizing is that everybody who's got a mortgage, everybody who's actually borrowed money from the bank, and the bank have said we are lending money, and they've not been honest and said we are facilitating credit, have got a claim against the banks. I think that's probably everybody. And as I say, if people would turn up at the Laurie Centre on Thursday, it's Thursday, not as I said yesterday.
You said tomorrow. So it's Thursday.
It's actually Thursday at 7:30 at the Laurie Centre in Birkenhead.
Okay.
I will explain specifically how the banks have effectively been scamming the people by claiming they're lending money when they patently are not.
What does ERED stand for?
It's Education Research for Economic Development. In other words, we know that if the government changed the money and fiscal policies, and it could do so very, very rapidly, our economy would boom, unemployment would go down, there's sufficient money for the health service, for the defense, and so on and so forth. There's no shortage of money. By changing the economy, by adopting a new fiscal policy with regards to issuance of money, we would all be in a better place. And we have got to ask the question, why don't they? And remember, Mervyn King said in 2010, that the money system that we have at the moment is the worst one.
Yes, he did say that, you're right.
He did say that, and he didn't say it's not the best. He said it's the worst. And I would underscore that. I would agree entirely with him. But it's not the worst for everybody. It's the best for the bankers, because they get interest on money that they don't actually have.
Wow.
They create the money, and they charge interest on it, and that's a subsidy. So the banking industry is heavily subsidized. I mean, they got 60 billion pounds from us, but not just that. They probably had hundreds of billions of pounds from us, probably trillions over the years. It's absolutely a disgrace. The other point I might make is, does anybody notice how many ministers of the Crown end up working for the banks when they've left office?
I think one or two people have noticed, and they tend to ring us. Roger, I need to leave it there, but thank you for letting us know about it. We'll leave it with the A-Team. It's Thursday, the 24th of April, 7:30 at the Laurie Centre.